Hi, I'm Jewel.
Hi, I'm Amber.
And I'm Dan.
We will be going over the tibial femoral joint today, so your knee joint.
So get ready for some fun.
All right.
Some knee-tastic time. So our objectives today will be going over the anatomy, the osteokinematics, the arthrokinematics, and motion analysis. So the anatomy of the tibiofemoral joint. So we are starting off with bones. So we have our femur, our tibia, our patella, and then our bony landmarks. So you have the medial and lateral femoral condyles, the medial lateral femoral epicondyles, the intercondylar groove, the intercondyle notch, the medial and lateral condyles, the tibial tuberosity, and the fibular head you cannot see because this is a medial slice x-ray of the knee. So then we go into the muscles and ligaments. So we have our quadriceps, which is composed of the rectus femoris, your vastus intermedialis, your vastus lateralis, as well as your vastus medialis. So right here you have your rectus femoris, you have your tensor fascia latae, so you know that is a lateral side. Then you have your vastus lateralis, your vastus intermedialis is underneath the rectus femoris. And then we have our vastus medialis, the most medial muscle of the quadricep group. And then we have our hamstrings, which is composed of your bicep femoris, your semitendinosus, and your semimembranosus. Your sartorius, you cannot see in this picture, but it is actually this little sliver on the side. Your popliteus is on the back, and then you have your gastrocnemius, which is a joint muscle, so it crosses the knee as well as the ankle. And then you have your plantaris. And then we have our ligaments. So you have your MCL and LCL, your medial collateral ligament, your lateral collateral ligaments, your acute popliteal ligament, your posterior tibial-fibular ligament, your oblique popliteal ligament, and then your ACL and PCL, your anterior cruciate ligament and your posterior cruciate ligament. Your ACL is most commonly injured with soccer, football, anything that involves more excessive running, as well as coming in contact with other people. Then we have our supporting structures. Our medial menisci, our lateral menisci, as well as our posterior capsule. And then we have our nerve innervations. So the knee is innervated by the femoral nerve, the tibial portion of the sciatic nerve, the peroneal portion of the sciatic nerve, as well as the obturator nerve. And now we'll go to Dan with osteokinematics.
All right. Thank you, Amber.
Well, you're quite welcome.
So, I'll understand the anatomy now, which means we'll move on to some motion here. So, osteokinematics, as we know, is the motion of the bones of the knee joint, or tibiofemoral joint, as we'll call it here. So for this joint in particular, we're looking at a hinge joint. Now with most hinge joints, take your elbow or your humeral ulnar joint, there's 1 degree of freedom, somewhat the same for the knee, but slightly different. The tibiofemoral joint is also a hinge joint, but it is important to note this is a modified hinge joint. Now what I mean by that is it not only allows flexion and extension, which is your typical hinge joint motions, but also rotation. So that means, again, it's a modified hinge joint, so 2 degrees of freedom, rather than your typical 1 for such joints. So as you can see with our little visual aids here, flexion, extension, and I'll demonstrate these for you as well. We have flexion, bring the knee on up, points closer together, and extension, just like it sounds, driving it out like that. That's our first figure right here. And our second figure, our rotation, internal and external. So bring that on up, internal rotation and external rotation. All right. So we're going to look a bit more deep into flexion and extension. So, like I said, this is in the sagittal plane, meaning that extends out in front of the body, so that front to back plane, which means if it's in the sagittal plane, as we know, Sagittal plane means medial lateral axis of rotation. So medial lateral axis of rotation. So when it comes to flexion, specifically, we have our range of motion, which is approximately 130 to 140 degrees of flexion. So this whole range right there, approximately 130 to 140. Now, extension, going on first, one more point about flexion before we move on from there. There can be a small degree of hyperflexion, kind of flex the knee beyond its typical range. Approximately with the knee joint, you're looking about at 5 degrees of hyperflexion. We're considering that. Now, extension, considering that as well, extending the knee to a closed pack position, which is full extension of the knee, obviously takes the knee to 0 degrees. Now, there can be a little excess with that, and that would approximately be our 5 to 10 degrees of hyperextension. Quick note about flexion extension here, and this will be covered more in detail in our motion analysis, but I'll touch on it briefly because it does apply. It can be closed chain and open chain. I have 2 exercises here as visual aids. As you see, our leg press up here. For any gym buffs as well here will probably know this. Your leg press, see this guy here has his feet attached to the pad up there, meaning that the distal end is fixed, which again is your closed chain. So as his legs extend and flex back, his feet are fixed, meaning it's the proximal leg that is moving. That is our closed chain. Conversely, we have our open chain, which is our leg extension machine, just like it sounds. The explanation's in the name. In that case, it's our proximal leg that is fixed. So as our leg extends and flexes back, the distal end is not fixed, meaning that is an open chain motion. Okay, so moving on to our rotation here. So this one, of course, occurs in the horizontal plane, meaning that rotation, as you can see, horizontal. As a result, our axis of rotation is vertical. So straight up and down, right down the center of that motion, horizontal plane, vertical axis. So another name for this is also axial rotation, and this gets its name for those 2 bones rotating on each other. Got your tibia here, rotating your femur. So knee rotation can also be referred to as axial rotation. Quick note on that there. So we're getting into our range of motion. So in our open pack position, right here, optimal flexion, our range of motion is approximately ranges from 40 to 50 degrees of range of motion. Now, breaking that down into internal and external, we get just about approximately 0 to 15 degrees coming internal, and a bit more here, just about double that at approximately 0 to 30 degrees going out. And again, you can see this if you try it yourself here. You can get a bit more motion going out than you can going in. Now, considering closed pack here, as I mentioned the last slide, closed pack is your fully extended leg. There really is not a whole lot of motion or rotational motion at that point, just about 0, little to none. As you can see, if your knee really is fully locked, you can still move that foot, but the motion will come from the hip here, rotate the entire leg. It's not coming from the knee. So really no motion at all. And if there is, very, very little at full extension and closed pack. Okay. A few considerations regarding that. And again, this will be covered a bit more in our section ahead with motion analysis, but we will consider this now. So closed chain, of course, can occur with knee rotation as well. I showed you the last slide, this will be considered open chain. Proximal is fixed, distal is not. Now, if distal is fixed, I'm sure you can kind of imagine what that would mean. A couple examples down here. So we have our example here of quick cutting, which occurs a lot in sports. So that's quick acceleration or deceleration in one direction or another. This is our picture of that right here. No, I'll demonstrate that here really quick. So say I'm playing soccer, doing really whatever. If I'm working quick this way, I cut quick that way. Again, our distal part is fixed to the ground. It's my upper body that's moving. As you can imagine, you're taking the force to your entire upper body putting it all on this axis of rotation right here. Shouldn't have to tell you, that may not feel too good in your knee if you do it the wrong way. That's where you see a lot of knee injuries, such as your ACL tears, is just from that quick twisting motion right there, putting a whole lot of pressure on your knee, on your tibiofemoral joint. Another thing to consider is knee valgus. That's our second one right here. You can see this runner's knee is caved inward. As we know, that's knee valgus. Now, I'll talk a bit about that here from my own personal experience. You see that a lot, both in sports and just in fitness in general. And that's one big consideration of protecting your knees when it comes to those activities. Oftentimes, in newer clients I've worked with at the gym, the biggest mistake you'll see them make really in lunges, squats, deadlifts, any kind of lower body activity is those caving the knees in like that. And that could be a result of, lower mobility. It could be a result of lack of strength, or coordination, or just inexperience, or not just really thinking about what they're doing. So oftentimes that's the first thing you want to correct, which takes me to our second point on that. Looking at our squat in particular, there's different ways to do that safely. So for different age ranges or skill levels, it's all going to come together on this. So one thing in general, take a resistance band, and this is a technique I've used before with newer clients, just to build that brain muscle connection. There really is that awareness of what your body's doing while you're doing it. Put a resistance band around about mid-level on the proximal leg. Have the client or patient do a squat. Just like that there. And as you can see, you want to avoid that knee valgus. And having that resistance band really kind of helps them get a feel for that. If the resistance is tight pulling against it, their legs, then knee valgus typically won't happen. If it goes slack, your knees come inward, again, not a good thing. So that's the first thing you want to do really, is when you're teaching someone a squat, to protect the knees with that, eliminate that knee valgus. So again, considering skill levels, age ranges, if you're working with someone, say a younger child or an older adult who might just not have the coordination, a good thing to do is sit to stand. Have them sit down in a chair, stand back up, making sure to keep the weight in the heels and the knees out. Thank you, Amber. So I'll demonstrate that. And again, this could be someone like a young child or an older adult. Sit down, stand up. Just like that. Sit down and stand up. Do this one more time here. Again, use that brain muscle connection, just that awareness of where your body's at to avoid that knee valgus. Sit down, stand up, feeling those quads fire. So again, sit to stand, low skill level, higher ages, younger children, and a way to eventually progress that, we'll take this pedal, pretend this is a kettlebell or a dumbbell, add some weight to it. Eventually we'll get to the point where we don't need the chair. Can move on to a body weight squat. Again, this is after that knee valgus has been corrected. Turn this way. After that knee valgus has been corrected, body weight squat. Add some weight, make it a goblet squat. Which leads us eventually, don't have one here, so can't really demonstrate it. We don't have one. Oh, so on mine, we don't have it, so on mine it. Barbell back squat or front squat, that'd be your higher level once you've mastered that not having knee valgus. And there's many others. Get to our higher levels. So again, ways to progress it, different ways of teaching that, different skill levels, different age ranges, and such. All right, and I think that leads us into arthrokinematics.
It's me again.
Hand it back to Amber.
So talking about arthrokinematics, so you have your closed chain and your open chain. So like Dan was saying before, you can see in this picture, you can see her doing a sit to stand and really trying to sit on the edge. That way you can use your lower extremity to get yourself up instead of your arms. So for closed chain is going to be rule 1. So the roll and glide are in opposite directions. So here you can see you have your femur, your convex femur moving on a concave tibia. So for flexion, you would have a posterior roll with an anterior glide. And for extension, you would have an anterior roll with a posterior glide. So like I was saying before, so it's like a squat. So going down, going into flexion, you have the posterior roll and anterior glide, and going back into extension, anterior roll and posterior glide. Then we have our open chain arthrokinematics. So for open chain, it's going to be rule 2. So with that being said, if the roll and glide occur in the same motion, or the same direction. So you have your concave tibia moving on the convex femur. So for flexion, it's going to be a posterior roll with a posterior glide and an anterior roll and an anterior glide for extension. So I have a picture of extension right here, so you can visualize from going from here to here. It is going in the same motion. So for like an exercise, you can do your long arc quads because you're going to be working in an open chain motion, so your arthrokinematics are going to be moving in the same direction. And then we go into alignment. Alignment is a big thing because that's how we walk. So that is one thing a lot of physical therapists will correct either from toddler and on, even into elderly. So you have your normal geniovalgum, which ranges from 170 to 175 degrees. So you can see here, this is your normal stance. Then we have our excessive geniovalgum, less than 170, so your knocked knees. Those you see more in children, and you want to get them out of that as quickly as possible. And then you have your geniovargus, which is greater than 180, so your bow-legged people. So those people are generally like your cowboys, your bull riders, because they sit in that position where they end up just in like a small squat with your knees out. So they'll walk like this. And then you have your genu recurvatum. So that is where you end up being in hyperextension for long periods of time, to where you start to walk with your knees just back instead of having the roll and your knee going with that motion. And then we go to Joe for the screw home mechanism.
Thank you, Amber.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, so we're going to take a moment and talk a little bit about the screw home mechanism. The screw home mechanism is what provides your knee with stability. I guess you can kind of think of it as the key to your home. It is what locks your knee into place when you are in extension. So flexion and extension are accompanied by a slight automatic rotational movement between the femur and the tibia. As your knee nears full extension, the tibia rotates 10 to 15 degrees. Automatic rotation assists in locking the knee. That's your so-called screw home mechanism. And it happens mainly in extension, but when you are coming up into extension from 0 to 20 degrees is about when your screw home mechanism, it locks your knee into place. We're going to go into, let's see if I get it. Okay, so we're going to cover a little bit about motion analysis. Motion analysis in the knee is pretty straightforward. We have your two movements in the knee that we've covered. We have flexion and extension. You can see the example of my little half muscle, half skeleton man running as he's performing flexion and extension. The two main muscle groups, which we've also, this is a little bit of review, the two main muscle groups that are happening in knee flexion and extension are your knee flexors and your knee extensors. You are concentrically and eccentrically contracting when you flexion and extend your knee, Your hamstrings and your quadriceps are what are contracting. Your hamstrings, so in my model, his hamstrings into flexion are what are concentric and eccentric would be my quads in extension. So, okay, a little bit of review, but what muscles perform knee flexion? So we have our semimembranosus, semitendinosus, biceps femoris, your gracilis, sartorius, gastrocnemicus, if I said that correct, and your popliteus, popliteus. Everyone says it different. This is a really good example. It's showing you posterior view of those muscles that are performing your knee flexion. So then for knee extension, on your prime movers of knee extension are going to be your rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedialis. One way I like to remember these is I heard a little mnemonic that said we have four muscles in our hamstrings. The rectus femoris showed up and wrecked it for us. So I always remember there's four muscles. 3 of them are vastus and 1 is rectus. It wrecked it for us, otherwise it would have been all V muscles. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of motion analysis of what is happening in this picture. What joint is being used? You can see that it is her knee joint that is moving, so it's her knee. Good job. What osteochondric motion is occurring? Think about what is happening right now. What motion is she doing? She's performing knee flexion and knee extension. Is it open chain or closed chain? You can see that her distal tibia is the one moving. It's freely moving, so it's going to be open chain. What arthrochromatic motion is occurring? If you think about what is moving, you can see that it is her tibia moving on her femur. So it's going to be rule 2, concave on convex. Yes, her concave tibia moving on a convex femur is causing flexion, which will be posterior roll, posterior glide, and when she goes into extension, anterior roll, anterior glide. Good job, guys. Okay, so which muscle is the prime mover that is allowing flexion? Hopefully. It's her hamstrings. We've already covered the 4 hamstrings, so I'm gonna spare you the time of listing all 4 of them that are allowing flexion. But that is our motion analysis. So hopefully we covered any questions that are had and that you enjoyed our video. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of motion analysis. I hope you can get a clear view of my picture and my model, but what is happening in this picture? She is doing hamstring curls or a lying leg press, I guess. So going through the motion analysis, which joint is being used in this example? Correct, your knee joint. Good job. Next, what osteochondric motion is occurring? So what bones are, or what osteochondric motion is occurring? You can see it's knee flexion and knee extension. So she's extending and now she's flexing. Is it open or closed chain motion that's happening? Well, you can see that her knee and her distal segment is freely moving, so you know it's going to be open chain. Good job, guys. What arthrochromatic motion is occurring in her hamstring curl? If you look about it and think, her tibia is the one moving on her concave, or her concave bone is moving on her convex bone. So it's going to be rule 2. And rule 2 is, well, in flexion, it's posterior roll, posterior glide, and extension, anterior roll, anterior glide. Last question is, which muscles is the prime mover allowing our lovely model to flex? If you think about it, I'll give you a moment. But you know that it's her hamstrings. And her hamstrings are concentrically contracting when she goes into flexion. Okay. I think that's everything, but if you want to be exercising a little bit more at home, it's kind of hard in quarantine if you can't go to the gym, so some good activities that you can do would be some that we gave examples of running is a good one. If that's hard on your knees, I suggest just a nice walk. Bands are always extremely helpful when working out in general. You can get all sorts of different tensions, lengths. Those offer a little bit of stability. Things such as squats and lunges are also a good activity to do. And there's lots of things you can do to keep your knees healthy as well. So I hope you enjoyed and that we covered everything. And if you have any questions, let us know.